Hello everybody, welcome back to the Braille's Woodworks channel. I do appreciate you watching. So about 20 years ago, a good friend of mine had an old farmhouse on their property built in the first decade of the 20th century, I believe. And it was pretty run down and they tore it down. And I went over there and I was able to retrieve a bunch of the lumber from it. And it was very old, harvested southern yellow pine. This is stuff that was old growth when it had been harvested, and it was amazing the amount of grain, how tight it was, and how beautiful. And I have built other things with it. I made a very large farmhouse table for my sister-in-law, and it has now ended up with my son. And the rest of that wood has been sitting for many, many years. And now I've decided that I'm going to use some of it to make a great big segmented bowl. So I'm using my new wedgie sled to cut these wedges, which I will then glue into rings. And we'll see that coming up here in a minute. This wedgie sled really makes it a lot easier to process these wedges and do it in a more timely manner. So here I'm checking out how many I need. The wedge that I am using is a 30 segment ring, and I'm testing them out to make sure that they are going to work. So I'm going to test fit them, see how nice and tight they are, and then I'll proceed on to gluing them up. With this design, I actually didn't draw it out. I kind of winged it. I just kept cutting different sized rings to then proceed on to fit them as best I could into the what I would believe would be a good final product. Here I am, I'm removing the clamps after the glue has dried. I didn't show up the glue up process because I've shown that many times in the past. But I'm getting them, getting the clamps taken off, and I'm now going to take them over to my drum sander, where I am going to run them all through and get them all nice and flat on both sides. Showed the in-feed, now I'm going to show you from the outside feed side, or the exit side, I should say. This new jet drum sander I have is pretty nice. It's got that smart sand where it will slow the drum down automatically for you. I kind of like that. I have this sped up, about 8 times. You know, it's sanding again, and it is not exactly an exciting thing to watch. And here we'll move on to something new. Alright, it's time to start gluing it up. So I had started this about a year ago, and this upper part I had already glued up has been sitting around, and I decided I needed to finish it up. And so I'm taking my measurements off that middle rod to make sure it's even all the way around. And then I will proceed on to gluing the rings one at a time, and also measuring them off the center. So in gluing these up, I use my Tight Bond 3. It's my go-to glue now. I use it for practically everything. I know you don't have to use it for things that will be inside, but you know, I find it a decent glue. I like using it, and that's what I'm sticking with. So I've got my stack set up to my right, and I'm taking them off. I'm applying glue just off camera, and then placing them on and making sure I'm getting my measurements right off the center post. So I'm going to finish gluing up my rings, running through my stack. The two final bottom rings, which will be the bottom of the bowl, I'm not going to glue on until I have the bowl on the lathe and I've turned the rest of it. You'll see that happen where I will glue them on and then use the tailstock to clamp the rings in place. So here I am using the threaded rod to apply the clamping pressure to the entire stack. Alright, it's time to put it on the lathe. I'm mounting it to my coal jaws. I have the pads on the interior pressing out, and I will use the tailstock to hold it in place. Alright, it's time to get turning in earnest, and I am going to get the outside shaped, the general shape that I need, or I desire, and it's a matter of working through getting rid of the steps first to get it to you so you can make a nice smooth sweep. You can see I'm getting there. I'm getting to the point. I'm getting the steps taken out, and I'm going to now be able to do some more nice sweeping cuts. So one of the problems I was having with this particular wood is that the resin inside this pine has crystallized. And so when it was cutting, some of it was cutting the same way that epoxy can if you use a gouge on it. It can splinter, and it was actually quite painful on my hands until I got down especially where I was making the long sweeping cuts. It was those initial cuts on the steps that was really, really painful. It would just shatter off and strike my hand pretty hard. So I glued on the two bottom rings, and now it's time to shape them right into the bottom of the bowl. And that's what I'm doing. I'm knocking down that last bottom step, taking it down to about the diameter of the two rings, and then flaring the two rings slowly into that previously turned section of the bowl. It's just a matter of slowly feathering it in together. And here I'm doing a push cut up, and that should take out that bottom step, that last part of the bottom step, and get it nicely shaped in there. I will say this wood was not easy to turn. Like I previously said, it did like to splinter off, but for pine it was very, very hard. I did have to resharpen my gouge frequently. I think the crystallized resin in the wood really, really dulled it out fast, and so it was a constant battle in this particular case. It was kind of similar to turning pecan, not quite as hard as pecan, of course, but it was as challenging, and it did require an extra number of sharpenings on the gouge. So in order to knock out a few of the ridges that had been developed when I was cutting, I decided to use my scraper. I don't use it a ton. I will say, after visiting with Glenn Lucas and taking the lesson from him, he did show me the best way to sharpen my scrapers, and I have used them more since then. Alright, I'm using my General Finishes wood ball finish to put a first coat on the outside. Then I'm going to turn it around and get started on the inside, and that's what I've done. Just start working on that top part of the rim, and then I will start working down into the bowl itself. So it's the same process on the inside as it was on the outside. Work through the steps, get them nice and smooth, and then start being able to make the nice sweeping cuts to get your final thickness. And as I had said before, with the difficulty of turning, it was the same thing on the inside. Actually, a little bit harder, I think, cutting on the inside. Not that the condition was any different. It just poses an additional challenge by doing the inside of the bowl versus the outside. I found not taking very aggressive cuts was the way to go. Be very subtle with my cuts, do them slowly. Have patience. I didn't have the lathe spun up super fast. It was probably at about 600 RPM through the whole process. So I changed out to my J tool rest to get into the deepest part of the bowl, and I also started using one of my Easy Wood Tool scrapers. I found that getting down deep like that, there was no real safe way to get a nice even cut with my gouge the way it was, and so I wanted to knock the steps out at the very least with my Easy Wood Tools Pro Hollower. So I'm getting down close to my final thickness. I'm trying to make my final cuts. And again, I'll take my regular bowl scraper and take it to the inside of this as well. And try to take out some ridges that I felt. I'm here using my double-ended calipers. Checking my thickness to make sure it's where I want it to be. So I got this bowl to about 3/8 of an inch thickness. Through most of it, it got a little thicker down towards the very bottom, but I was okay with that. I kind of liked it that way. It gave some more weight to the bottom. So I always leave a hole in that bottom ring. It makes it easier when I glue up on the jig itself. In this case, I didn't do that, but it will now be drilled out, and I will put a plug in there. I think that looks really good, and I've done that on almost every segmented bowl I've ever made. So I'm using my bowl scraper again to take off those ridges on the inside and get, work to that final thickness again. Alright, I'm drilling out the bottom, and I will be gluing in a plug. Got my plug. Now it's time to pound it home. It sure was an awkward angle to try to get it pounded in, so had to use the end of the hammer in this weird way. Alright, so the glue is dry, and I'm going to use my Easy Wood Tools Hollower again in order to take the plug down and make sure it's nice and flush with the rest of the bottom of the bowl. I don't use the Easy Wood Tools that much, but I do find them very handy when necessary. I know some people just absolutely hate the thought of using a carbide tool, but in the end, all they are is scrapers. And I would challenge the people who don't like them to say, you don't use scrapers? Alright, it's time to move on to sanding. I'm going to show that's it. And now I'm going to apply my inside finish on the bowl and add another coat onto the outside as well. Using my General Finishes wood bowl finish, I really like using that stuff. I've found it does the job nicely. So the brittleness of this wood made it a little problematic, I found, for trying to turn it around and take off the tenon on the lathe. So I decided to do it using a flap sander on an angle grinder, and that's what I'm doing. I got it knocked off, and now I'm using my RO90 Festool Rotex sander to sand it down. I did spend a lot of money on this thing, so I will use it. As much as I think they're way overpriced, it is a nice sander. I'm running through all my grits. I take the bottom to 220, and the rest of the bowl I take to 400. Get them all sanded down, and then I will again apply my General Finishes wood bowl finish, as I'm showing you here. And I will apply a few coats. Now I will come back later and put this under my laser and put my logo on, as well as a little bit of a description of the wood. So I'm going to show you the bowl inside and out, and that'll be it for today. Thank you all for watching. If you think you've gotten anything out of this, please click like and subscribe. I would appreciate it very, very much. Also, please leave me comments, because I will answer each and every one. And everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.